Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Sounding Black podcast with Till and Will. I'm excited about today's episode. I can tell you're excited. So let's get into it, man. So, of course, one of the segments we do is what the people want. And I actually saw something this morning I thought was pretty cool. So it's kind of what I want in this situation.
So not what the people want.
It's what I want. But it's eventually we will get all together what the people want. Because ultimately that's what this is about. It ain't about me. But I saw Chad Johnson tweeted out yesterday asking how everybody's Friday was going. And one of his followers responded that they were about to get evicted. So Chad said, you know what? Send me the notice.
Yeah.
And I'll pay for it.
Oh, wow.
And he actually sent somebody $1,500 via PayPal so they can pay for their rent instead of getting evicted. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it is, especially considering the way people look at Chad Johnson. I think they don't really view him in the most positive light because of his celebrations and stuff. But I don't think that has anything to do with his character. So I'm glad to see he did that for the guy.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty cool. So I figured in this case we could talk a little bit about what I wanted.
No, that's definitely worthy of talking about, man. I've always liked Ocho Cinco myself. So.
Well, you kind of favor him a little bit.
Boy,
So
here you go. Only on the football field.
Well, that is a lie.
I got video evidence. You saw it this week. Damn near pick 6.
Oh, man.
But running a 5.440.
Right. So actually, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Chad Ochocinco ultimately is because today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the characters from the NFL this week. Yeah. There are quite a few things going on, and definitely, I think, worth conversation. And with that said, I believe we could hop right into talking a little bit about Colin Kaepernick, talk a little bit about Robert Kraft, and maybe visit some Kareem Hunt. And I made a joke with you earlier this week.
Be careful.
Right.
Any Kareem Hunt jokes.
Right. Well, it wasn't necessarily Kareem Hunt. Let me establish that.
Oh, okay.
But so with what we found out this week, Colin Kaepernick has reached a settlement of his grievances with the NFL after 2 years. Some estimating he could receive between $60 to $80 million.
Wow.
And so a brief history of that for many of those who don't know, for any of those, I should say.
A little recap, if you will.
Yeah, a recap. That's anyway, dad jokes. A little recap, obviously, the protests that began in the 2016 preseason with Colin Kaepernick. Many people thought he was protesting the flag when that wasn't the case. But the idea was that he was protesting police brutality. He just happened to be doing it during the national anthem. Of course, there's no reason to go into all of that. But ultimately, it came about that the NFL owners were colluding to essentially keep him out of the league. And so Colin Kaepernick, along with his lawyer, took it to the courts. Yeah. And eventually it came to a settlement essentially 2 years later, a season or season and a half removed from the beginning of this entire process. Right. So, of course, he's going to receive payment for that. So the question then becomes, who is the winner of this outcome?
Man, that's an interesting question because if you're looking at it from Kaepernick's standpoint, financially, I think that is more money than he was making the year that what did he do? He rejected or he opted out of a contract?
Yeah, he opted out of a contract. But
I don't remember how much he turned down.
He was making a pretty decent amount.
I think it was 17, 18 million.
Yeah, something close to that.
And for those who don't know, top tier quarterbacks are getting close to 28, 30 million a year. So if he was going to get another starting job, even at a mid-level, he would probably get 20, 25 million a year.
Well, let me say this. I'm a Giants fan. And Eli Manning is being paid $23 million, I believe, next year. So that should give you some perspective.
Yeah, I'm still focused on the fact that you're a Giants fan. Anyway, throwing that out the way. I mean, the point that I'm making is from a financial standpoint with the fact that there's still question about where he fits in the quarterback hierarchy.
Right.
Financially, he may have been somewhat okay. Right. Somewhat. And then there's always the idea of endorsement. So I really can't get into that so much. But I think the real winner in this is probably the NFL. And the reason I say that is because just from my own background, like if I have a client that is being sued, you've got to think about it from two standpoints. One, is it going to cost me more to defend myself than to just pay this person to go away?
Right.
And so depending on the company and how much money they have, sometimes it's easier to just cut a check, right? Other times it's like, I got to keep something quiet. Mm-hmm. That's another reason you might want to pay, because you don't want things to come out through the whole discovery process. So the reason I say the NFL is the real winner here is because we've seen them spend tons and tons of money to fight Ezekiel Elliott. We've seen them spend tons and tons of money to fight Tom Brady. They spent tons and tons of money to fight Al Davis when he wanted to move the team. So the NFL has no problem sending the message and spending every potential dollar that they have.
Right.
So for them to settle tells me that they didn't really care what it cost. There were things that they did not want to come out.
Absolutely.
Now, just by implication, they're harmed, but whatever is implied from them settling is nowhere near as bad as what I suspect they were trying to keep from coming to light. So that's why I think they're the real winners in this. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
I think there's winners on both sides. To me, obviously, to your point, the NFL probably saved themselves a lot of money by going ahead and settling this entire thing. But I also believe that from Kaepernick's perspective, there was a chance that he would never have seen any of this money if he didn't pursue the case. And if he, the idea to me is that, yeah, you settled, but essentially something worse could have come out of this on both sides. We don't know what this would have led to. So I think Colin Kaepernick won in the aspect of financially.
Yeah.
And also, when I think about it, I'm like, you're taking on a giant. So
yeah, 100%.
It can't just be Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reid, because Eric Reid was involved with this too. So if they were really going to take down the NFL, they were going to have to get more guys involved. And because it was like a David versus Goliath situation, I think Goliath in the situation won ultimately. Right. But I think there was a winning aspect to Colin Kaepernick settling too. Yeah. And I guess ultimately in my mind, I'm like, what are we expecting from Colin Kaepernick in this situation? Because this is money that if he was in the league, he would have gotten. Yeah. And it's a hard question to me to answer, in the sense that I believe Colin Kaepernick won, but I think there was more. It was bigger than that. But I can't blame him for what. Right. I can't blame him for settling in this case.
See, for me, it does come down to a couple of things. Like, number one, if he says, because I think some people have treated him unfairly by saying he took the money and, hey, it was always all about the money. Right. But you have to understand, when you make an accusation that someone is colluding against you, right? You're saying that you guys are all in cahoots working to keep me out of the league. Exactly. And then the league that has notoriously for years and years fought everything tooth and nail, even when it appeared they might be wrong, for them to cave, that suggests that Colin Kaepernick was right to a certain extent. Right. Because, like I said, they're different from, clients that I have or other people who say, I'd rather just pay to keep the cost down. This wasn't about keeping the cost down. This was about suppressing information. Right. So if people want to take that further step and look at it from that standpoint, then Colin Kaepernick did win, but no one's highlighting the fact that the NFL kind of caved on this. Right. They focused on the financial aspect, and that's what makes the NFL, to me, look like the winner, because I can assure you it's all about PR. And if you got text messages, emails, anything going back and forth that these guys don't want out, then that was something that for them was invaluable.
For sure.
They would have given him even more probably. They just, as long as those things didn't come out. Right. I mean, it is about the scandal.
And I think, too, one of the reasons why I believe in Colin's winning of this, and again, Eric Reid winning of this, is because I think there's a certain aspect that essentially he could have gotten nothing at all. Yes. Because like when you look at Sharif Abdur-Rahim, for those who are unfamiliar with him, he protested essentially in a similar way with the NBA years ago.
He did that? I don't even know
Yes.
that. I remember Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, but Sharif.
Maybe. Wow.
I was going to say, I remember Sharif was the one that played for the Grizzlies, I think. I don't remember if he had
I
any
don't even
protest.
know how I just like mix the names, but either way, the message behind it is like somebody did this before Colin Kaepernick did.
Right.
And so they walked away with nothing. It was like the end of his career, and honestly, I've seen him, and he's still balling to this day.
Yeah.
But he walked away with nothing at all. So to just like take something from this in general, it's a win individually for Colin Kaepernick.
Yes. Now, I think to me that spurs another question, because there were some, and we go online a lot, social media, and just kind of pick up what people are saying about some of these topics, which is how we know like what we should be addressing. But some people were essentially trying to say or call him some sort of sellout for accepting.
Right.
And I don't know that that's the case. I mean, I'm curious to hear your opinion, but just to give you some position as to what they were saying, a lot of people were kind of laying out the fact that, you took this knee for a particular purpose, and then you sue. Somehow it became about you playing or not playing, and then you agreed to take money, and now where are we?
Yeah.
I don't agree with that position, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are.
I think it's unfair to put that on Colin Kaepernick alone, because he was protesting for a particular reason. He wasn't necessarily protesting the NFL.
Right.
I think people's expectations of him was for him to protest the NFL, and that's not how this all began.
Right.
He began by protesting police brutality.
Right.
He never said he didn't want to play in the NFL again. So you're putting your expectations on the shoulders of Colin Kaepernick, and that's not fair to say that he sold out or he gave in, because if he would have gotten on the NFL team last season after the protest, then what would people have said?
I mean,
would you have watched the NFL then?
Right.
Would you have been still protesting then?
Right.
What were your expectations? You can't throw Colin Kaepernick under the bus for selling in terms of getting money, because in my mind, that's money that was due to him.
Right.
So to have this idea that he's a sellout, how in the hell is he a sellout?
No, I agree. And I think I never thought that he was, but I do remember my initial reaction to it all was, man, this has got to be tough on him. And I know some people are going to be like, oh, what's tough about getting $60 to $80 million?
Right.
I'm not saying that part. I'm saying that when he took a particular stance, I don't think he ever expected it to get this big. He didn't expect to become the face of anything.
Right.
And then once it happens, there are a bunch of other expectations that are heaped upon you that you may not have known you were signing up for, but now you're thrusted into that position.
Exactly.
So now he's in this position, and now it's like you've made this accusation against these owners. You're saying that they're working against you. We're close to finding out the truth potentially, and then you walk away with money instead. And
right.
we never get the answer. So for me, that was initially a concern, but then I had to take a step back and be like, but that's not necessarily what he signed up for, and we can't heap those expectations on him, just like we can't tell Travis Scott not to perform or anybody else. Like we can't start, creating these additional requirements for people where it affects them more than it affects us. Right.
And to add some perspective to my comments is that Colin Kaepernick, even after all of this, he's not receiving any NFL checks. He's not receiving money in terms of endorsements in the same capacity that he was at first. So all the stuff that he was doing outside of that with like the Know Your Rights camp and all the stuff that he was doing for the community, he's essentially financing this stuff himself. Mm-hmm. So at some point, like you have to bring some sort of money in, and like, selling the Nike jerseys or like the Just Do It campaign, that only extends so far.
Right.
So it has to become bigger than that, in the sense that when you have these expectations of Colin Kaepernick, if you want him to continue to be the person that you look at him as in terms of the leader for the community, you have to understand that all the stuff that he continued to do for the community, he was doing that by himself. And he's facing this giant with all of this money, essentially, that if you want to extend this process, you still have to consider, paying a lawyer and, all of these fees and everything else that you have to pay So the NFL essentially could have just drugged this out.
Well,
and we don't know what the end of this would have been.
That's what I'm curious about, because I think from a legal perspective, usually when you take on a case, you're either getting paid up front, like a flat fee, or you're getting paid by the hour in your billing, or you're getting a contingency, like a percentage of what they got.
Right.
My guess is Garagos is getting a percentage of what Kaepernick received. I don't know this personally, but I'm assuming, because otherwise Kaepernick has laid out a lump sum of money. And at that point, if he did, then for Kaepernick, the idea of resolving the case sooner might make sense, because it's saving him money. Like, you know, I can't keep funding this thing all the way to the end. If it's an idea of, look, whatever's going to happen, the attorney's working on a contingency, that's, you know, he's going to get a percentage of what I get, then finances aren't Kaepernick's concern. It's more the NFL's concern, because their attorneys are working, you know, by the hour, and they got like tons of them. Yeah. So that's just an interesting point to kind of to note.
And I think ultimately with this, I mean, we could talk about this forever. There's a lot to consider, but I want to get to, like, in your mind, from your perspective, what would you say is next for Colin Kaepernick?
Well, I think that's the interesting part, because it's really in the hands of the NFL, right? Yeah. Because he was playing at a decent level. I wouldn't say a high level, and the only reason I say that is because he was on my fantasy team and I had to bench him. so I wouldn't say he was playing at a high level, but he was playing well enough for me to roster him. But I definitely think he was playing at a level that suggests that he should be in the league and even starting for a handful of teams from what we last saw. Some people are going to say, oh, it's 2 years ago. You know, we don't know. Well, Josh Johnson was sitting on his couch for God knows how many years, right, and a slew of other quarterbacks. So I don't think that how long he's been away from the game is an issue. So the real question to me is going to be, now that this lawsuit is settled, does the NFL let him play? In other words, does someone reach out? Because if they do, you're almost admitting that there was collusion, you know, because it's like a settlement and then he's playing. Or if the NFL says, you know what, we stick to our guns, he's just not allegedly good enough to play, then there's still going to be this concern, like, but really? I mean, because we still, you know, we're still seeing you drag in like one old guy after another to still play. So when you say what's next for him, I think he's really in the same position he was in before the lawsuit. He's in the same position he was in, you know, obviously richer, but in the same position, because it's still up to the NFL, and I don't know that they're willing to admit their wrongdoing in this.
I mean, I think that's probably the most evident part of this. The NFL is not willing to admit that, and to suggest that Colin Kaepernick is not in control of his own destiny at this point in terms of like what he wants. That's wrong to me. And I'm not saying that's what you said or what anybody said, but I believe that at this point, if Colin plays in the NFL again, if that's what he decides his path is, I'm not going to be mad at him. Right. If he decides it's not his path, I'm not going to be mad at him.
But do you think that's a decision that he's going to make? Because, I mean, here's my thing. He can decide whether he wants to play. He had already decided that by attempting to get into the league. Right. But the point I'm making is that it's not really up to him. You know, that's the problem.
I 100% agree with that.
And then, you know, I think, what was it, a day before he settled, there allegedly was a $20 million offer or $15 million offer from this secondary league.
So what it was is the AAF wanted him to play along with Tim Tebow. He said, sure, give me $20 million. Because that's essentially what he would have been making in the league. So I think that's what it was. But then it came out that with the AAF that they were about to fold until like the NHL guy gave them, I think, $240 million or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they obviously couldn't afford the $20 million. I think that's the total of what all the players are getting this season.
Oh man. So no, I mean, but back to your point, you were talking about his destiny and what he decides he wants to do.
Yeah, I believe that if I'm in Colin Kaepernick's position, I probably wouldn't pursue playing in the NFL again. Right. Obviously, you know, there's that aspect of it that he's probably not going to get invited to play in the NFL again. But in addition to that, like, you are putting yourself in a place where you're sacrificing your body, and then,
Right.
there's no telling what can happen and, what the owners have going on, like, or how the league's going to treat you, how the fans are going to treat you. There's just so much that can happen that can go wrong. I personally wouldn't put myself in that position, but again,
Right.
I'm not going to be mad at him if he was to decide that he wanted to pursue that and something comes from it.
Yeah, I think for him, man, he's created something that, I think, and a lot of athletes deal with this, this idea of life after the sport and trying to fill that void, that importance, that level of importance, financial, like all these different voids they're trying to fill when they stop playing. And I think Kaepernick, at least through his journey, has found and embarked upon something that will be fulfilling for him.
Absolutely.
So he definitely doesn't have to go back. But then a part of it is, if he's sitting back and he's looking at what he did before and whether he still thinks he can play and whether he still thinks these guys are colluding against him, there may be a part of him that says, I got to give it another shot.
Right.
I just don't know if he's going to do that. And then the real question to me is, if he decides not to make that attempt, are people going to come after him again? Is it going to be back to this whole idea that it was just about the money? So I feel like he's in a difficult position in terms of what he decides to do. If he decides to try again or if he decides to walk away, where it's going to leave him in terms of, how people view him.
Yeah, as my mom would put it, he's between a rock and a hard place. So, but I guess my next question to you is, how will Cap be viewed historically in your eyes?
You know what? I've heard some people put him on a level of a modern day civil rights leader. I'm not personally willing to do that, just because historically I don't think it compares. I think what he did do is he created a conversation that needed to be had, and I guess this insistence on making it about the flag and respect for the country and respect for troops created even more attention than I think it was initially intended.
Right.
But I don't know that, you're going to put him in the same sentence as Malcolm or Martin or anybody of that generation. At least now, his story's still unwritten,
Right.
and he's doing amazing things, but some of the things he's doing are things that are being done by other people in different communities, just that don't have that large of a name, like in terms of like knowing your rights and fighting against police brutality and mistreatment of minorities. So I don't know if it's going to go that far, but I think the void of, I guess, like really known leaders is going to essentially put him in a place where he will be remembered. Like there's no way you're going to talk about the NFL or even social justice in the 20 teens without his name coming up. So I think he makes a way into the history books. I just don't know to what level it reaches.
To me, I think instead of comparing him to MLK and Malcolm X, the conversation would be closer to like a Muhammad Ali.
Okay, I can see that.
And that connection obviously is because of the sports, but also his stance. Like Muhammad Ali decided he wasn't going to go to the draft, and he was out of boxing for 5 years as a result of that.
Right.
So, Colin, he decided he wanted to protest police brutality, and he's so far been out of the league 2 years because of that.
Right.
So that making that sport connection, and then obviously the connection with the NBA too, I think that's along the lines of what my expectations of how this story will be written, moving forward.
So you think, Colin. I'm wondering if it's going to be more of a, because, like when they do talk about Muhammad Ali, it's usually like they bring him together with Jim Brown and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Russell, and they're saying sports, athletes were activists too.
Right.
So I don't know if Colin Kaepernick is going to stand on his own, or will it be like, well, him and LeBron James and then whoever else steps up. So I really don't know from that standpoint, but I 100% agree with you. I think that's probably more the lane that he'll be in.
Yeah. And personally, do you think this changes the way that you view him?
The settlement?
Yeah. Just the settlement, everything that's happened. Does it change anything about the way you personally view Colin Kaepernick?
No, I mean, me personally, I don't think anything has changed for me. To be honest, prior to him even taking a knee, I wasn't the biggest fan of him. You know, he just wasn't my cup of tea in terms of like the kind of quarterbacks I like, or like nothing. Like he was just he's just a San Francisco quarterback. You know, I'm old school, man. I like Warren Moon.
Terry Bradshaw?
No, Warren Moon. Warren Moon was my guy. You know, I'm out in the street trying to throw like him, but my passes only went 10 yards.
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah. That was unsuccessful. We know that much, at least.
but yeah, I mean, but even like some of the modern day quarterbacks, I was a huge fan of Michael Vick. You know, it's just different type of quarterbacks, and I know he kind of fit that mold, but he just wasn't my guy. And I don't know if it was because it was the Niners or what.
What's your team again?
The Bears, man.
Oh, okay. I see it. All right.
Yeah. Anyway, you thought you was gonna be able to make a comparison? No, we're doing way better than y'all.
Well, I mean, whatever. You haven't won anything in a long time, but sure.
We've been in the playoffs recently, like a few weeks ago.
Did the Bears and the Giants play last season?
I don't know. I don't pay attention when we play.
They did.
Play those teams.
The Bears lost. So anyway, this is not a sports broadcast.
Let's get back. So my point is, in terms of how I view him, I think for me, I like when athletes step outside the box. Mm-hmm. You know, you've heard people criticize LeBron James, like shut up and dribble, or all these things where they try to limit you to just an athlete.
Certainly. So
for me, I respected him more just by the fact that he was willing to step outside of his role as an athlete and say, hey, I see something wrong and I want to address it. That doesn't mean I agree with, everything in terms of like the misinformation he had about Cuba, but that's a separate issue. But the fact that he was ready and willing to speak up on injustice, potentially realizing, and this part I don't know if he realized that he would lose everything, but potentially risking everything, you know? So that's my feeling on him.
Shifting gears a little bit and staying on topic of the NFL, obviously, have you seen the information that has recently come out in regards to Robert Kraft? I think is quite hilarious in my mind, but have you seen all of the stuff that has come out about him?
I haven't seen everything. I've seen some of the memes and some of the jokes, but yeah, that's bad.
So, for those who don't know, Robert Kraft is the Patriots owner, the New England Patriots owner. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you have the Kraft singles, the Kraft mac and cheese, the Kraft ketchup, like all of that kind of stuff. So, he's been accused of soliciting sex at this Central Florida spa massage parlor. And he's also not the only person. There's another billionaire that's linked to this. But they're saying that, Robert Kraft, among other people, is suspected of being used for prostitution and targeted by law enforcement. I mean, Robert Kraft himself, obviously, is involved with all of this. And police say Kraft visited the Orchids of Asia Day Spa in Jupiter, Florida, twice. And video footage shows him receiving paid acts, in quotations, in a room at the spa, and surveillance video shows him being driven to the spa, Police Chief Daniel Kerr said on Friday. Authorities said they wouldn't immediately release video or documentation. Yeah,
that's pretty bad.
I mean, there's a lot that can be said about that, but I just want to hear your take on, the information that has been released so far in regards to Mr. Robert Kraft.
Well, it's funny because, well, actually, it's not funny. It's more sad than anything. Like I was one of those people, and I don't know what your thoughts is, that used to think that prostitution was like a victimless crime. I don't know if you ever thought that, but a lot of people actually thought that because it's like, hey, if somebody wants to do that,
right?
It's their body, blah, blah, blah. If that's how you want to make a living, you make a living. But I've represented prostitutes. I've represented a couple of pimps. And I've represented some Johns, mm-hmm. And what I've learned through all that is that very, very, very few of these women do it voluntarily. Yeah. Like, so few of them do it voluntarily. Very, very minor percentage. And even then, there's something like serious or severe going on that even allows them to get into that field.
Of course.
So I think from a bigger picture, you know, you've got this NFL owner who is seemingly like, okay, so, you know, his wife died years ago. He's an older, rich man, you know, and this is how he chooses to satisfy himself. What's the issue? Well, the issue is that whether he realizes it or not, he's supporting this very, very heinous underworld of human trafficking, because a lot of these girls, that's how they get there, you know? And to see, not only, I guess, to see him involved, but to be in a situation where he can be caught like that is baffling to me. You know, like one of the things, you know, like, for instance, people with his kind of money, like that's not something you would really expect that he's going to a massage parlor. You know, I'm not condoning it on any level, but I just assumed like people at his financial status, somebody's flying in, or you know,
of course,
like it's escorts, you know, something to that effect. But him just going down to the local spa, I didn't see that coming at all.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Yeah. I wouldn't have expected that. And in terms of how this all plays out, I think this speaks to what we were talking about a few weeks ago. Like, yeah, obviously you want to wait and see in terms of what the facts are, but there is video evidence, according to the police in Florida, that it is Robert Kraft and he's paying for these acts. So in my mind, there's only one thing the NFL can do in this situation, and that is take it on, and you know, you have to give him some sort of consequences for this. I don't know what it looks like in terms of like saying he can't own the Patriots anymore, or what it looks like in terms of like waiting for that conviction to happen. I don't know exactly what that is, but he has to have consequences for this, because like you said, many of these women are victims of something else. Right. Like oftentimes it's victims of abuse, or, you know, they are kidnapped. And like one of the places, ironically enough, is like Atlanta. That happens a lot, sex trafficking. And that's obviously where the Super Bowl recently was. And so a high percentage of those women are taken at events like that and then pushed into these lifestyles. Oh, wow. And so I think when you add all of these things together, and when you look at Robert Kraft, the guy that people believe he is, one of the things that kind of upset me was that everybody was talking about how good of a guy he was. Like, who cares? Like, one of the things that people tend to do is, like, when people of a certain status or people who aren't people of color, when they end up in situations like this, the automatic response is like, oh, well, no, he's a good guy. Right. Who cares how good of a guy he is? Yeah, because he did this heinous act, regardless of how you put it. And we don't know even how old these women are. Right. And we don't know these women's backstories. So the NFL has to take action, and has to take action soon and do something with the information that they have. And when you talk about bad publicity and all these things that can happen as a result of that, if you're going to disqualify Colin Kaepernick, why don't you show the people what it looks like when something happens like this at that level? And if you want respect from the community, whether it be the black community or the people who support the NFL, or, you know, I think one of the biggest things that we've seen over the past few years is like women need to be shown more respect from the NFL. Because I mean, you get into false allegations and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And of course, like the domestic violence and things of that nature. But show me your real guns when you talk about what you need to do in this Robert Kraft situation. Because honestly, if it's me, he shouldn't own the team anymore. But that's just me. That's just me.
I don't know if I'm willing to go that far to take the team from him, because that, to me, the real precedent is Donald Sterling. But you know what? I take that back, because on one level, Donald Sterling, I don't know. I got to think about that. I wasn't expecting to go that far. I was looking at fines and suspensions, maybe even draft picks, but I wasn't ready to say get rid of the team. But let me read something to you. The NFL's conduct policy is pretty interesting, because they say specifically, everyone who is part of the league must refrain from conduct detrimental to the integrity of and public confidence in the NFL. This includes owners, coaches, players, other team employees, game officials, and employees of the league office, NFL Films, NFL Network, or any other NFL business. So in other words, anyone associated with the NFL is held to this conduct detrimental to the league, right? But they go on and say even, they have an additional spiel about ownership. And they say ownership in a club or league management have traditionally been held to a higher standard and will be subject to more significant discipline when violations of personal conduct policy occur. So
there you go.
When you say that, it's just like, okay, if a player gets busted in something like this, it's probably a couple of games, probably. Yeah. And if you're looking at prostitution on its face as a minor crime, because in most jurisdictions, prostitution for the John and for the prostitute are misdemeanors, and even in where he got busted, very minor. I think it's carries like a 60-day max in jail. Here in California, it's like a 180-day max unless you're repeat. It could be a year, right? But for pimps, it's felony, it's prison, So the pimps are hit harder than the prostitutes or the Johns for clear reason, right? So if you look at it just from that standpoint, with just that definition, prostitution, it doesn't seem like the minor offense. But if you take it in conjunction with the fact that it's almost always linked to human trafficking and abuse, and then if you also take into consideration that this particular sting operation was based on human trafficking, if I'm not mistaken, that's what even caused them to start looking into it, then you, by, I guess, any sort of, you don't even have to have any mental gymnastics to make the link that, in a way, Kraft is supporting human trafficking, right? I mean, it's a leap that you can make in a way, right? And so if you look at it from that standpoint, then the severity of the punishment has to be high. Yeah. But if the league looks at it as quote unquote like just prostitution, then I can't imagine it's going to be high at all. It's probably going to be a fine and maybe some sort of commitment to women's shelters or something minor like that.
Yeah. And to me, like the way I look at it is this particular conduct could possibly lead to Robert Kraft going to prison. We don't know. Yeah. At that level, when you have that much money, oftentimes, it doesn't.
Well, for him, it's not going to be that. I mean, just so you know, like the most he's going to see on this is probably, like, think of it this way. Every charge carries a maximum term of confinement. This, I believe, in Florida carries a max of 60 days and like some mandatory human trafficking classes or something like that. Something I read. So they want to create awareness and then a potential punishment of 60 days. If a person has no record and they've lived 77 years like he has with no other violations, it's probably going to be a fine and probation in the classes. So he's not going to, I doubt he'll see a single day of jail on this case. So whatever consequence is going to come to him will not come from the judicial system. It'll have to come from the NFL.
Yeah. Because and my expectation is that anything severe is not going to happen to him in terms of like law.
Right.
Legally, I don't think anything crazy is going to happen to him. But to your point, I think whatever action is going to be taken by the NFL. But if you want to take a stance, now is your chance.
Yeah.
Michael Vick went to prison because, he had dogs fighting.
Yeah.
And, when he got back, it took him even some time to get back to the NFL and start to play at, whatever level. But when you talk about the conduct policy, he was suspended, when this came out in the first place. So what are you going to do with Robert Kraft? If you want to set a precedent, if you want to make a statement, this is your time. Again, I've already made my point in how I feel.
Yeah.
But I don't think the NFL is going to do that.
Well, here's the interesting thing, because there's a couple of things happening. One, you remember Jim Irsay. He had major issues with drug use.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think anything happened to him. It could have been minor, like drug rehab or something like that. And I don't know what the NFL's policy was at the time. This was maybe 5 to 7 years ago, post Peyton Manning, so maybe like 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah.
right? So you have that as kind of a precedent as to how they treat an owner who operates outside the standard.
Right.
But I think the real issue is going to be as they decide, like they did with Ezekiel Elliott and all these others, they have to do their own internal investigation. They're not going to wait for a conviction or wait to see how things play out. They're going to do their own investigation. Correct. Now, what's probably happening at the same time is we got Kareem Hunt, who's yet to be suspended. You know, he just got picked up by the Browns, but he's yet to get suspended. So that decision is going to have to come at some point. And there's going to be this thing where the NFL has to know that those two decisions are probably going to be on the heels of each other. And there's going to be a reaction depending on what they do to Kraft and what they do to Kareem Hunt. And the reaction is going to be varied based on gender, based on race, based on, you know, all these other things that are going to make people feel like the NFL did or didn't do enough or did too much to somebody for some reason or another. So I think they got a very interesting decision to make. And I don't know. And
to that point, we can do the wind down right now because part of that is I wanted to have a quick conversation about Kareem Hunt because what happened in his situation is the Chiefs decided on a lower level from the team level, let's go ahead and release this guy.
Right.
Because video evidence obviously came out with Kareem Hunt of him kicking the woman in the hotel, in the hallway of the hotel, which happened months before the video evidence came out, and the NFL was the Chiefs were able to take action.
Right.
Kareem lied about that, but now we're at a place where he signed a 1-year deal with the Browns following his midseason release from the Chiefs. So in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, did he deserve a second chance?
Well, for me, I think second chances are more than appropriate. Especially in light of the fact that they seem like this is really a country of second chances. Like there's so many people who always get the opportunity to redeem themselves. I just don't think it's automatic. You have to show contrition. You have to show that you're addressing whatever the issue is, you know, and then you are going to be, at least in my mind, held to a zero tolerance standard after the fact, you know. And if you look at Michael Vick, you look at Ben Roethlisberger, who doesn't get enough coverage as far as I'm concerned for all the things he's been accused of.
Right.
There are people who, I think Dante Stallworth, I don't remember if he got another chance. I mean, if Ray Caruth could run still, he might.
Oh, God, this guy.
But the point is, like, there are second chances out there. Yep. And the NFL has made its point in terms of domestic violence. This is violence against a woman, not domestic violence, but still falls within that same realm. And players who have committed have been able to get second chances. So I think he does deserve a second chance. It's just a matter of what does he do. Let me take that back. He deserves the opportunity for a second chance, but it's up to him to kind of prove that he deserves that second chance. And from what I understand, I guess there's anger management classes being taken. He's talked to different executives with Cleveland, and he showed contrition, so they feel comfortable in bringing him aboard.
Yeah,
and I'm okay with that.
And part of that is like the GM of the Cleveland Browns now was the GM who also drafted Kareem Hunt.
And Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, that was my next point. He also drafted the guy who had a history of like that domestic abuse, so to speak. So obviously he believes in second chances, and I don't disagree that people should have a second chance. So I mean, I think it's cause for an interesting conversation, and you know, when you consider second chances, people deserve the opportunity to rehabilitate.
Yeah,
and that, you know, goes even further than the NFL. People deserve the opportunity to rehabilitate, but if you show after receiving that second chance that you're not trying, you're not making that effort, then we're having a completely different conversation.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting, man. We see it a lot. Like the minute some of these guys, do something like this, everyone's calling for their job. He should never play again.
Yep.
And like, that's the part that bothers me the most. You know, like, well, I shouldn't say that's the part that bothers me the most. I mean, the act itself obviously is troubling, but the responses to those acts, I don't know if they are appropriate because, you know, that's my field of work. And I can tell you, people who commit domestic violence, can be CEOs,
Yep.
and they can be drug dealers, and they can be everything in between. And people aren't losing their livelihoods behind it. They are, potentially going to jail. They're taking classes. They keep their jobs. Sometimes the jobs don't even find out about it. But here we're asking, when it's an athlete, just, cast them off, no second chance.
Yep.
Don't get to play ever again. You don't deserve it. You make too much money. Like all of these different things that have other connotations to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the part that's always been baffling to me is why is it that other people can commit these particular crimes and still have the opportunity to carry on and to rehabilitate and to get back into society and continue on with their lives.
Right.
So,
and I agree. But I would be honestly interested in hearing what our audience thinks. Like,
oh yeah, for sure.
As far as all the things that we've talked about, like with Robert Kraft, what do you think his consequences should be? With Colin Kaepernick, what do you think the next steps for him are? With Kareem Hunt, does he deserve a second chance? Like, what do you guys think? And part of that, I want to make sure that when we talk about social media and things of that nature, get involved. We want to hear your voices. We want you guys to share your opinions in terms of, our ratings and reviews. How's the show? And yeah.
And I was going to say, like, I know we've been posting some questions and we will continue to post them, but we definitely look forward to any active participation because we bring that information into the show. We want to be able to express what the people actually want, So, sometimes we get text messages and what have you, but if you go ahead and shoot a message through the social media or a comment on the social media, we'll make sure to include that information in our discussions.
Right, and if you want us to shout out your name, we'll definitely do that too. So look forward to that. All right, guys. So with that said, this is Sounding Black. I'm Till.
And I'm Will.
And we're sounding off.